So that, and to me, that is like the most maladaptive thing about surrendering to anything that isn't, I think, your inherent, innate desire that's just in you, right? To do certain things, to be, according to your bent, right? And that, to me, that's profoundly sad when we can't make that distinction and we can't make the attempt sooner.
Right.
Yeah.
When it's end of life, before you realize that the world really was your oyster.
It was.
Yeah. Welcome to the Enso Project. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. So the purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. So with this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, how are you today, man?
I'm good. We're also going to allow our perspectives to transmute certain beliefs and perceptions that we have.
For some of our listeners who may not be familiar with the concept of transmutation, how would you describe that to them?
My own personal definition is that the universe is somewhat asymmetrical, and we, I think, have the ability as human beings to create symmetry out of that asymmetry. But we have to absorb the asymmetry first.
Do you think that there's an internal payoff to creating symmetry out of asymmetry for human beings?
Internal payoff.
Sense of satisfaction, fulfillment.
Yeah, I do. There's always a sense of fulfillment when you can make order out of chaos. But there's also an internal tax associated with that, too.
Why is that?
Well, I just think you're literally transforming time and space. You're, think about this is probably a poor analogy.
I doubt it.
Think about a garbage disposal. Like I turned on the switch this morning. I always clean up the kitchen. And, I hear it does not sound like it's running clear. And so I stick my hand down there and I turned it off first, obviously.
Oh.
Stick my hand down there, and I realized there's this plastic component that had got stuck down there, and of course I know immediately where it came from. But the thing I also noticed is that the things that basically grind up the food and disposal, the components, the metal components, they also have abrasions and little, dings and dents in them, right? And they're metal.
They weren't designed that way.
They weren't designed
over time.
that way,
Okay.
right? Yeah. And so, I think in a lot of ways, what I mean by there's a tax on us internally is that when we're converting or transmuting asymmetry into symmetry, it definitely taxes us. It definitely wears at our internal components.
So there's an internal payoff. There's also a cost. So it's like anything in this world. But I guess what I'm getting at is, and this is totally not our topic of discussion today, but I like it. I like where we're at. I think that there's some semblance of an intrinsic drive there to, it's kind of like organizing. Like it feels good, even for folks who aren't particularly organized, just on balance. I think there's something satisfying about bringing order in a way, and like order is in the eye of the beholder, right? So order to me could look like chaos to you and vice versa. But since we have a similar schema, so we're both human beings in this world, we might be more likely to group certain things with others. And I feel a similar way about creating symmetry. I think it's a reflection of balance. And I think that is possible because, balance might just be one of those transcendent variables that it literally, it's at work, it's hard at work in every situation that we could possibly imagine, but oftentimes we're ignorant to how it's working, to its effects. And I think that there's a lot to be gained from observing it, observing how balance is impacting your life, and especially through the lens of like frustration. What's causing you to feel, if you feel some kind of like inner disturbance, what's causing that? And could it be related to an imbalance, some way, shape, or form, some permutation of this greater concept of having equilibrium? And symmetry feels to me like an extension of that. What am I talking nonsense over here?
No, I mean I agree. I mean you I think you have to hear a cacophony to make harmony.
I like that.
Yeah. And what may be harmony to you, the harmony that you create may be a cacophony to someone else.
For sure.
Or
take
something
like
else.
Somebody who loves classical music and take them to a death metal concert, and vice versa, right? But the really phenomenal thing to me about human beings, one of the reasons that I think they're just absolutely incredible, is that there are also those individuals who can see the beauty in both.
So I was gonna
No way.
I was gonna bring up another example, right? So like something that may be just terrible, like let's say fascism, right? May be harmony to someone, fascism. Or like eugenics, right? It may have been harmony to someone, to a lot of people,
right?
But to a lot of people, it's not. And then there are a few individuals that come along and they say, you know what? I understand the perspective. I understand the thought process. I understand the unaddressed grievances that would lead a person to take in the cacophony that is their experience and harmonize it into something like as terrible as fascism. I understand that, right? And then they could do that with the other person as well, right? So yes, those are unique individuals with a unique skill set. And I do think that's a good segue into what we're going to talk about today.
It is. Yeah. Can we go on one more rabbit trail?
Okay.
Before we get on to the topic? So I wonder, this is just purely my own experience. And so it could be like totally out of the ordinary, but I'm wondering if you've picked up on this too. I think that in our culture, it's perceived as cool or like hip, trendy to find the problems with things, to be the critic. And I do not feel the same way about finding the beauty in the experience or in the object or in the system or in the person. However, I've just noticed throughout the course of my experience that fundamentally, I suspect that there is beauty in everything and in every person, no matter how flawed they might appear on the surface, right? There is beauty tucked away in there. And I've noticed that my ability to identify it, observe it, and appreciate it, it's like a huge moderator variable for my quality of life, right? So my quality of life goes up and up and up, up and to the right, the more that I'm able to appreciate things in others. And I don't know for sure, but I suspect that there's some kind of inverse relationship with, criticism and finding the negative. And I don't want this to devolve into just like optimism versus pessimism, because it's really not what I'm trying to get at here. Let me go back to the premise. Do you think that is that somehow, have we interpreted being a critic as like that's the cool thing to do?
I definitely think we at some times aggrandize cynicism.
Yeah, it is.
And I do, to your point, I do think there is beauty in everything. Fortunately and unfortunately, there is. There's a reason why the National Geographic Channel shows you the lion or the cheetah tearing up the poor helpless animal in slow motion, or chasing them, for a couple segments, right? So there's a beauty in it, as horrible as it may be. The impending scene, what's going to happen, and it's still they allow you to capture those beautiful moments. So no, I don't think that's too far-fetched, and I think your assertion that there may be we may be reading too far into the negative stuff, right? How we say, it's really hip, it's really cool, it's really unique, it's edgy.
That's the perfect word for it.
To find the negative in everything. But I mean, I just think that's a lens, and I think what's more beautiful is whenever you can observe and slow it down and say, man, look how that person really scrutinizes or really analyzes what's going on in life. And I wonder, do they see everything about themselves? Like, does the cheetah really know how fast it is?
Right. Well, there are definitely a lot of people in this world that would make the case that that's kind of the differentiation, right, between humans and animals, is that level of awareness. And I think it's kind of hard to jump on that bandwagon just because we don't know what the experience of an animal truly is. We're making a lot of assumptions because we have no firsthand experience. Very limited communication that's taking place between, there's very minimal interspecies communication, right?
Do I know what another person's experience is? So for example, I think we remember like the opioid crisis and like how a person would be able to like pick from a chart of like their pain levels.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because a person could pick, the same color, the same face, but there's no way to really know for sure what their pain is unless you're living inside that person's body.
Right.
And, I think in a lot of ways, because we all live with pain, it's a basic human condition, there's really no way to know how something truly impacts a person outside of how it impacts you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Like, we're talking here today.
Yeah.
Could you tell that my grandmother died on Sunday?
This didn't happen.
It did happen.
It did happen?
Yeah.
And you're telling me now?
Right. But my point is, you wouldn't have known.
No, of course I had no idea. I'm so sorry to hear that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a painful thing.
Yeah, actually.
But how it impacted me is completely different than how it would impact you.
Of course. Yeah.
And so I think there's a limitation there, an inherent built-in limitation that we cannot truly perceive other people's pain. And we can't see the beauty. I think we cannot see the beauty of their experience because we cannot perceive their pain. We cannot perceive how much or how significant something is to them because we can't really understand how significant or the impact of the loss or the perceived loss is to them.
That's kind of their unique gift in a way, I think. And it might sound ironic to say, that it's a gift when the context is a really painful experience. But I forget where I first heard this or learned this, but the idea that pain is an erosive force, and it's eroding the edges of our container. Think of it like, the Grand Canyon. It wasn't always so grand, right? At one point, it was a whole lot of rock, and then the water etched and carved and created this, this cavernous topography, and we can appreciate it as it is right now, but it wasn't always that way. And similarly, pain is a force that broadens and deepens our own container, but that container is just a container. It can be filled with anything. So suddenly, now you have a reservoir that has an expansive quality for love and for kindness and just fill in the blank, right? For anything, but you can experience something to a greater degree, because of having that painful experience.
Right.
So, have we tap danced around our topic enough yet? Time to
no. Well, yeah. I mean, but I think it connects. I think
no, definitely. So, our intention today was to talk about surrender, the act of surrender, and really try to get as many vantage points on it as we possibly can. And I think, we like to do this sometimes. Talk about the maladaptive and the adaptive aspects of it. And so, let's start with the maladaptive, so we can have a little more of a happy ending
of surrender.
Yeah.
The maladaptive aspects of surrender.
It's a little more challenging, right? I think
it is.
To me,
it is. For me, it is too.
Yeah.
Well, I do think. So the most obvious question is, what are you surrendering to? I'm sure we'll unpack that.
Yeah.
But I think just in a very general sense, the maladaptive aspects of surrender would be anything that leads to helplessness, where you say, like, I don't even have a chance, I'll just give up, right?
Loss of
or
agency.
Give in. Relinquishing your agency. Like you said, loss of agency. I think that's very maladaptive. At some point, like I said, I bring up the National Geographic, but even from a entertainment perspective, as gnarly as it is, right? We still want to see the prey run as fast as they can, right? We want to see that for as long as we can possibly see it.
Right.
From an entertainment perspective, it doesn't even work if they just give up, right? If they don't run.
Right. Nobody's watching that show.
Right. Yeah. From just a basic survival standpoint, it doesn't work if they are helpless and they just give up. I don't even think the cheetah or the lion may even be interested if they just give up. They may suspect, like, oh, something's wrong with this thing. Like,
definitely goes against nature. Right. Where's your survival instinct, Mr. Zebra? Yeah.
So I do think, and we said agency, but I think the most important thing to me, in terms of being a human being, is our ability to self-determine, right? So that's what I would say. We relinquish the ability, or not ability, but our will to self-determine. That's very maladaptive. Self-determination
in this context, meaning like our ability to create and to influence our future, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Choose your own story, right?
Yeah, exactly. And no, that's what I'm thinking in a similar vein here. And I also, as you're talking, had this desire to delineate between surrender and giving up. Because I think that while they're similar concepts, they're also distinct, right? Giving up is kind of more along the lines of relinquishing agency or self-determination, and whereas surrender is intentional. This is choosing to live to fight another day, right? When you're surrendering in terms of battle. It could also be surrendering more like conceding a point.
Right.
You know, and why would you do that? Well, there are a few different motivations. You could be trying to appease the other party, or you may have learned something. You may have grown, and you're just no longer attached to that point of view that you had before. So you surrender it.
Yeah.
And you are better off for having surrendered that point of view. And just while we're on the concept of like the maladaptive, facets of surrender.
Still waiting on your maladaptive.
Yeah, I know. I haven't covered anything maladaptive, and that's because it genuinely is hard for me. You know,
Yeah.
I think that when you surrender what is most sacred to you, that is where it kind of gets into more uncharted territory, right? If you're surrendering your core values, like I used to think about loyalty a lot. I think we may have even talked about this on here before. Definitely talked about it off the show, off air. But just I always prized loyalty. I thought loyalty was just the coolest thing. It's so connected. It's so relational. It's very heart-centered. But then I stopped to think at some point. This critical thinking comes in. Scientific method is, what if you're loyal to the wrong thing, the wrong things, the wrong people, the wrong person? And how do you, since there is no right or wrong in this world, how in the world are you supposed to determine that? And I think that the best model that I can come up with for how to determine that is basing it off of our value structures. I think that they're at the root of everything that we think, say, and do. It's what truly matters, why does it matter, and then how about we base loyalty off of that instead? So I think I'm definitely like a never give up type of person.
Yeah.
I love the burn the ships mentality, but I also think that when we're acting out of ego, that becomes very, very dangerous. And that could be a maladaptive situation.
Yeah. For surrender.
Yeah, absolutely. If you, I think I'm arguing my counterpoint actually right now.
Maybe. I mean, I'm enjoying the perspective. Yeah. I agree.
No, it's just one of those things where whenever we are tied to something for the sake of being tied to it, even surrender, which is kind of like the act of separation, right? It's creating a little bit of space between us and usually something that we hold dear or value.
Yeah.
I think that it can land us in a tricky spot if we don't have our parameters set, if we haven't taken stock of what truly matters to us. We see this with individuals who get into really, really desperate situations, that their compass is there is no north. They do not know which way to turn, and when you don't know which way to turn, you're most likely to turn to the most viable, near-term option. And sometimes that most viable near-term option can be unspeakable.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I mean, I think there has to be a healthy balance between what is important now, like what I value now, and then trying to do your best to think about what will be important in the future, near future or distant future. Because, I mean, they're different. And
they are.
Thank God we're not living by the same values that America had, 100 years ago.
Oh, my God.
Right? But those were very important values.
At that time.
And there are people who are willing to die for those values, right?
Right.
So on an individual level, if I look at the past 10 years of my life, there were things that were very important now, when I look back, if I'm taking myself back there. Then I look back and I'm like, that wasn't that important.
Right.
Right? So now I'm trying to do my best to find the balance between the two. It may be something as simplistic as a credit score.
Right.
And I'm like, but I really want to maintain my credit score. But I also need, to have some sense of capital for my entrepreneurial exploits. So what's important now relative to, what will be important? Now, do I want to go down to, a 5 something? No. That's not going to be important now, and it's not going to be important in the future, right?
Yeah.
But there is, I think, a healthy balance or harmony that may present a set of optics that may look chaotic, or it may look whatever, cacophonous.
Right.
I think I said that correctly. To the observer, right? But then when they hear the story later on, and they're like, wait, he did what? He leveraged his truck so he could make these things called Yeti coolers, and now his company's worth a couple $1 billion. Yeah, that happened.
We respect that. We admire that. That long-term vision.
Right.
And I don't know that I've really spent a whole lot of time thinking about this, but just the lens through which we're viewing the world. What if we could take those glasses off and check the prescription as it relates to future orientation, right? So, am I seeing the present day through how these circumstances and the actions that I take will impact me in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 50 years' time, if I'm, so fortunate to still be alive at that time? And then what is truly phenomenal, and I think happens on rare occasions, right? But when people transcend the scope of their own lifetime, and they start thinking about future generations, and I think it's grandparents, they get this, right? They're when they see their grandkids, little babies, they just light up and they have hope for the future and a better world, a better tomorrow. They see the progress that we've made, and they can kind of visualize and entertain what that might look like when their when their grandkids are in their 60s. However, caveat here, how do we balance that long-term orientation with living in the present moment? Where, my decision to wake up at 5 a.m. this morning and go to the gym, that's a long-term decision, right? I'm not likely to I'll see some marginal impacts of that throughout my day-to-day, perhaps throughout my week. But really, this is like a habitual behavior that creates a long-term outcome, something that's really important, right? To, depending on your values. However, I'm a newlywed. This is our first episode since being married. Give me a little bump. Come on.
A little bump there.
Yeah.
For the camera.
For the camera.
We'll narrate. We just bump fists.
We should have made like a...
yeah, we need sound effects.
A little sound effect. Anyways, so I think the flip side of that is in this present moment, one of the most important things in my life is investing in this beautiful relationship that, from a certain perspective, is in its infancy.
It is.
Rachel and I have been together for some time now. We've been very deeply committed and ingrained in each other's lives for some time now. However, we just started a new chapter.
Yes.
And this new chapter, the pages are all empty. They're all blank. And I could, instead of hopping out of bed at 5 a.m., I could turn over and I could cuddle her. I could tell her that I love her. There are things I could do to invest, and that's a very near-term perspective that also potentially has long-term consequences. I want to ask an expert, Josiah.
I'm not an expert, but I will. So I'm going to answer that. I think you laid out an illustration about grandparents, right? And they're so excited about their grandchildren, and they have so much hope for the future, right? Hands down, who is nicer to you overall in your life, your grandfather or your dad?
I would say most people would say their grandparents.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I met your grandfather. He's a pretty nice guy.
Yeah.
Real nice guy.
Incredible.
And I've seen y'all's relationship. So my whole point is, I think we look at the grandparents and how they're treating it's still their progeny, right? And to your parents, they're like, man, this is a different person. They're not treating them the same way they treated me. And I think in a lot of cases, the grandparents are looking at some of their decisions, some of them being parenting decisions, and they're saying like, maybe I made a little too big of a deal.
Yeah.
I see now that my grandson or my granddaughter at this age, when they do this particular thing, I probably read too far into it whenever my child, my son or daughter, when they were in that same particular, instance.
Yeah.
So I think evaluating our decisions relative to what we hope to see in the future, I think that plays a big, part in how we find that balance or that harmony. So, we have the luxury of looking at our parents, right? So, for me, I a lot of times will get out of bed and go, do the workout or do my routine. In a lot of cases, because I've seen what that looks like when a person doesn't take care of themselves, right? And they put all of that onto their significant other, right,
Wow.
or spouse. I've also seen where, you can take care of yourself too much, right? And you don't find that harmony or balance, and it can be somewhat neglectful.
Yeah.
I have, in a very short-term fashion, lived in that reality on both sides, right?
Yeah.
And so I think for me, when I can get out of the reality, right, that has positive and negatives, it's whenever I can find the balance between what it is that I want to ultimately happen and what is currently happening,
Right.
right? And that takes an awareness. It takes rising above. It also, I think, takes looking at our examples.
Yeah. I was certain you were going to say perspective.
Well, yes,
And-
perspective. Yes.
And I just want to shout out to all the old people in the world. Just want to say one of my very, very favorite things, and I've had the opportunity to witness this several times, and it never fails to amaze me, is when, let me just set up the situation here. Young people are fretting, regretting, consternating, overwhelmed with anxiety about an event. It might be a present event, it might be a potential future event, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. But there's a disturbance, right? And the perspective is so limited when we're so young. We just don't have a lot of context to call upon. And without that reference point, it may be a catastrophe. It may be a disaster. We really don't know. And so, we have this negativity bias and we assume the worst oftentimes. But I relish when an older, wiser, more experienced person gets injected into that dynamic and they hear out the story in the way that, some wise older folks will do, and they're very quiet and they're careful and they're listening and they're questioning and they consider it, and after they've heard all the information, they're like, don't even worry about it.
Don't worry about it, right? Yeah. What are you doing?
This is not a big deal at all.
It turns into the grandparent playing with their grandchild. Like it's like, this is what matters.
Yeah.
Are they alive right now? Is their hand in the socket?
Right.
Is it wet? Are they literally in, imminent harm?
Yeah.
And the answer is no. Okay, well then they're fine. Right. Whereas the parents freaking out all the time.
Oh, definitely,
right?
all the time.
Yeah. And so I think it's the same thing. I mean, we may not, if you're listening to this, you may not know someone who is older. I mean, for my wife, her grandparents, she only had one grandparent. The rest were, deceased. And, so me, I had all four of mine, right? And
Until Sunday.
Until Sunday,
oh
yeah.
My gosh,
and
wow.
all of them with exception of one, lived into their 90s.
That's
so
incredible.
I found that the best way for me to learn, or to kind of have that perspective, like that older person's perspective, like that's gonna be fine, is to really ask and learn about some of the mistakes that were made, right? Because then I can see like, oh wait, even if I mess up, it is not that bad. Like I see what became of this person that I still admire. Yeah. And if they messed up and they're still fine, I'm going to be fine. Right?
That's a possibility.
It's a possibility,
right? That we kind of discount and discredit oftentimes.
Yeah. I mean, and I think we can sort of look at everything that way. We can look at civilizations. I think we're going to make, in 2026, we'll be what? 250 years old as a country?
Yeah, I think so.
It's a young civilization.
That's exactly right.
You're thinking about the exact word?
No,
it's like
just
the
timeline.
Yeah.
No, I don't know the term.
No, it's like some long term, but
that's cool.
It just means 250 years.
Yeah.
But my whole point is, if we truly, I think we're freaking out a lot as a civilization, like we're our society. We're like, this election, and it's like, if we take the time, to really look back, we're in our infancy as a civilization. There have been civilizations that have not been civilizations 3 times longer than we've been around.
Wow.
Right? So we can do that with our own species. We can look back and we can literally look at the rings in the tree and see the experience and say, well, as long as we don't get here,
right,
we should be okay.
Establish the boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that this is probably a good time to talk about the adaptive side of surrender.
Yeah.
And one of those things that can be surrendered, we've seen people do this rather effectively and frequently, is surrendering that worry, that sense of anxiety. And I think it becomes easier to do this when you have greater perspective, right? However, I don't think that you have to have greater perspective in order to surrender your anxiety. For some people, knowledge and context is a pathway towards peace. And I think however you get there, in this case, it's more maybe about the destination, finding your peace, because it's going to dictate the quality of your life, depending on how you define quality of life, right? But
or peace.
Right. How do you define peace?
Man.
Kind of,
I put myself on the spot.
You did.
Well, when I'll take the long way around. Well, peace for me is kind of like that surrender, and just looking at things with the uncertainty, like embracing the uncertainty that I do not know how it's going to turn out. And that I'll take you back to I did a speech for your pre-wedding event.
It was great, by the way.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Means a lot. And before I gave the speech, people were trying to encourage me, and that's great. But I told them, I was like, I said, I'm not sure it's going to matter in 50 years when they are celebrating their 50-year wedding anniversary.
Yeah.
And in that bit of uncertainty, because it may matter. You guys may pull out the transcript and you may be like, man, this guy said this, and this, right? but there's a good chance that it's not going to matter, right? And so any anxiety that I had, by the way, paled in comparison to keeping myself stable on the
boat. But we're on the
core
nets.
strength. Yes,
I don't even know what they call those necessarily.
It was man, that was challenging, right?
Yeah.
But my whole point there is that realizing that it is just an attempt. It is still an attempt. Nothing is really finalized yet because it's not over. The energy is still being transmuted, and even me, I will be transmuted in my entirety.
Yeah.
And so I just need to make sure that I don't give up too fast. Make it entertaining,
right,
for the observer at the very least. Make it inspirational. Make it hopeful. For someone to say, well, I'm going to go a little bit longer.
Right.
I'm going to push a little bit harder. Right. So I think for me, that's how I find peace. But it varies.
It varies. And as it should. Yeah. When you're talking about, will it matter in 50 years? It makes me think about the book that one of the books that I picked up. I love to read on vacation. It's one of my favorite things to do. And a book that I've been meaning to read for a very, very long time now is Bronnie Ware's Top 5 Regrets of Dying, or something like that. I feel like she's one of the foremost people that I know of on the deathbed literature. So she's in palliative care. She's helping folks as they're kind of hospicing.
Oh, like
right?
doula sort of.
Yes,
similar.
Thank you. Yeah. And she used this opportunity to observe and document people's reflections about their life at the very end of it. Because there's this clarity that comes to many people at end of life. And it really fascinates me. I think, it's like you like to read dead people's books. Their story's been told, right? And it's not necessarily subject to change. We may reinterpret some of the information based off of new information, but whereas our stories are still being written, right? So you can, and this happens a lot, right? Especially with celebrities, people will be really big, diehard fans, and then that celebrity does something that's just absolutely devastating, and you kind of, it's like this person that you built your identity around in some cases, which can be dangerous. But anyways. Picked up this book, and a reason I feel like it's really odd to get this particular book, to read while I'm on my wedding trip and my honeymoon, but I really wanted to know, what can I do now that will make a difference in 50 years? If Rachel and I are so blessed to have a marriage of that length, then what are the observations that have been made by those who have come before, that they've passed down free of charge? I did pay for this book, but their advice was given freely to this, this hospice nurse. And I just love it. I'm going to share a few of them if that's cool with you. So number 1, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me, which is seems so cliche on the surface, but I mean, it's just I think it's hard to understate the relevance of this statement. It's rings true to so many. Yeah. The second one I find really funny, especially since we're both involved in entrepreneurship and we really love our work. I wish
you're really good at it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm involved.
I think you're the better entrepreneur, actually. But anyways, second one is, I wish I hadn't worked so hard.
Yeah.
And I think that because of the system that I'm not trying to be all conspiracy theory person, but just the system that we're brought up in and the outcomes that it perpetuates, we find people, oftentimes, I work with them all the time, that, they've spent their entire career in insurance or banking or something. And it's not that insurance or banking is like soul sucking to everyone, but for some people, they should not be subject to that environment. Yeah, and they have been for so long. Yeah. And I think that it's just like, life is precious. Don't waste it to, there. Anyways, we make concessions here. I see this all the time. Number 3, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Oh my goodness. I think there are 2 extremes in family dynamics. We have like the ultimately reserved family where things are just never discussed and they're pushed under the rug oftentimes. And then the flip side of that is kind of like those enmeshed and codependent relationships where like words are always flying and they can be extremely loving and they can be extremely hateful. It's like just volatility versus stagnation. Maybe, might be, so, I like that one. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I think some of the stories about like, I wish I had told my kids that I was proud of them. I wish I told them that I loved them. Wow. It's just like heartbreaking, Number 4, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I think we undervalue friendship, the power of friendship. Yeah. In such major ways to our detriment. And that's not to say that sometimes, life creates situations where we let go of friends.
Right.
And that happens for a reason. We've talked about this a lot. We don't have all the same friends that we had 10 years ago. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we're better off for it.
Well, there's definitely a podcast that we have for it, so.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. And then last but not least, number 5, I wish I had let myself be happier.
Yeah.
And I think, I love this one because the first time that I heard somebody say happiness is a choice, I had a negative reaction to it. I did not, I feel like I generally view it as it's not that easy. For many people, like they're really struggling, they're in the grips of depression, they're in these thought patterns and thought loops that keep them in this really closed and negative state. But the more that I've thought about it, the more I realize we have such influence. And I don't want to undercut or discount the level of influence we have in our own happiness. It truly is not up to anyone else. But I don't think that there's anything productive that comes from shaming people who are dealing with crippling depression and telling them that it's their fault. Here we have a hot potato called accountability.
Sure, and I agree. I can see and understand the beauty in both of those perspectives. I think what brings peace, if I can just add on to my answer, and thank you for reading that, right, summarizing that.
Thanks for letting me share it.
Yeah, no problem. Is something that sticks out to me is I wish I would have had the courage. I wish I would have had, there's courage and then there is the act, the attempt. These people are saying, I wish I would have, had the, it was an agency, they're fully expressing that they were capable of all these things.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the courage to make the choice or to make the attempt. And, so I think, so make the choice to be happy.
Right.
So I think they're acknowledging that there were instances where I know I could have been happy and I chose not to. So I think that, it precludes cognitive challenges, right, where you can't help, being clinically depressed, right? Or seasonally depressed. But I think they're talking about the clear-cut choices, and they chose not to do that for whatever reason.
Right.
Just like all the other examples or reasons that they gave where it was a matter of courage, right, to make the attempt. So I think what brings me certainty is always kind of applying time to it, right? Like, what happens if I don't give this speech because I'm too anxious to give it? Well, if, Lord willing, I die on this boat today, right, fall overboard, and I didn't give the speech, well, then it may not matter, but it may also matter because it could have been the last words that I said.
Wow.
And so telling people or doing the thing that is inherent in all of us, the thing that is a natural desire and inclination, is, I think, one of the most beautiful things we can do. It's where we find the most peace and clarity, where we actually make the attempt. Because, we may look back and we're like, if we didn't really want to be an insurance salesman, there are people out there that do, but if we really didn't want to do that and we did that for the majority of our lives, and we're now in hospice care, and we're saying, damn, I wish I really would have just went for it.
Yeah.
Like what I really wanted to do. I really just wanted to paint, but I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to provide for my family.
Mm-hmm.
That's noble,
Yeah.
right? But it also leads to, a clarity that you don't realize until there's no more time.
There's no more time.
Right.
Yeah.
So that, and to me, that is like the most maladaptive thing about surrendering to anything that isn't, I think, your inherent, innate desire that's just in you, right? To do certain things, to be, according to your bent, right? And that, to me, that's profoundly sad when we can't make that distinction and we can't make the attempt sooner.
Right.
Yeah.
When it's end of life, before you realize that the world really was your oyster.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I want to draw our attention to the fact that the learning still occurred. There was that moment of clarity. I think we think of our lifespan as being so finite and that, the start and the end. But there are people in this world that believe that there's part of the purpose is the learning. So, maybe
the
that's
aggregate of their learning,
right?
And what they were able to articulate end of life. I think it helped a lot of people, inspired a lot of people to really say, wait, it's time dilation. Let me stop wasting time. Let me find a way to really do what I want to do. And sometimes that can have detrimental consequences, but there are positives to that as well. So, I love the way it plays out. I love to see it in slow-mo, even though I know or can see what's going to happen. Right?
It's just an extra level of clarity, for sure. All right. Well, I think that was a beautiful note for us to end on. Thank you for sharing it. Also, I want to pose a question before we log off here. Are there opportunities in our lives where we're not giving ourselves permission to be happy? Maybe a good question for us to think about, because if there is, why not enjoy it?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you next time.
The Enzo Project is brought to you by Bold Human Capital and Noon Holdings. Edited by ELE. You can find the Enzo Project on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music, the song Full Bloom by Jewel and Nuamina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.